Welcome to the April 20th, 2020 special Troy City Council meeting for our budget study session. I'll call the meeting to order and ask for the roll call, Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Baker?
Here.
Councilmember Abraham? Here. Councilmember Brooks?
Here.
Councilmember Chamberlain Krenga?
Here.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton?
Here.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Here.
All present. We have one regular business agenda item this evening as it relates to the budget, but first there is a motion to waive City Council Rule 17. So I will move, resolve that Troy City Council hereby waives City Council Rule number 17, members of the public and visitors, to move public comment to after D, business stated in the special meeting notice. Support. Moved by the chair, supported by Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton, that we approve the motion to waive City Council Rule 17, members of the public and visitors to move public comment to after D, business stating the special meeting notice. Is there any discussion? The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Councilmember Brooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain Krenga?
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Motion carries. So we'll have public comment read into the record after we do our presentation and discussion. So there's one agenda item on the agenda this evening, and it is the presentation of the proposed fiscal year 2020 to 2021 budget presented by the city manager and his team. We are certainly aware that this is, again, very unusual circumstances. Traditionally, we have two live public study sessions at City Hall in our chamber or in our boardroom. And then, of course, we have our public hearing and we adopt the budget in May. And we'll still do all of that as necessary as we see fit and as required. But we are working through the logistics of having meaningful public participation and comment. So we're starting tonight with our study session. We'll have a presentation by the city manager and his team. Of course, there'll be questions and discussion by council. And then at the end of this meeting, it's my understanding that we'll talk a little bit about how we plan to move forward and what we'd like to do as next steps, if we need to add additional study sessions virtually, or how best to work through all this. So with that, I also wanted to say a little bit of housekeeping for council members. The way this is set up, we do have a break set up during the presentation that the city manager will allow for, and probably just 5 minutes. So it's a good idea. We'll take that quick break. And then we'll come back on. When the presentation is concluded, the end of City Manager Miller's presentation includes an opportunity for questions from council. So if we can hold all of our questions that come during the presentation until the end, that would be the preferred method for a couple of reasons. One, primarily for transparency purposes. The public will be watching the presentation slideshow and won't see us during the meeting, during the presentation. So if we had to ask questions, it would seem a little bit out of context and a little bit strange. So we'll hold those questions till the end. And also the reminder that we've already asked several questions already, and those answers have been responded to by city management and are on our website for the public to see as a late submittal to tonight's agenda. They'll continue to be there. And because we are going virtual here, we don't have all of the city staff that would normally be here for a budget study session. So it's my understanding that any question that maybe is too specific or digs in a little too deep for tonight's presentation, we'll submit to City Manager Miller this evening and Rob Malzik, the Chief Financial Officer, and then they will respond in writing with us after properly discussing with city staff. And those questions and answers will also be provided for the public and put on our website. I think I covered the basics for housekeeping for now. So with that, I'll turn it over to City Manager Miller to start the presentation.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and City Council. I have another housekeeping item. IT, it was my understanding that the presentation was going to take over the whole screen. Can you do that, IT?
It currently is on the broadcast.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank all of our staff. It takes many people to prepare the budget, from department heads down. But I really would like to specifically thank Beth Beth Tashnik in our office. She does much of the word processing for the document. The budget is really Rob Malzek, our Chief Financial Officer's baby, and he is in charge of the whole thing. And Stephanie Flesher from our office makes it look good. And Drew Benson, the assistant to the city manager, really helped out in preparing this presentation and also coordinating the questions and answers. Secondly, I would like everyone in the public and council to bear with us. These are very difficult and trying conditions to approve a budget. It's just so different from our nature because we do this in public and we're now doing it from our homes. I also would like everyone to keep their thoughts with the medical professionals out there. I have some close relatives who work in emergency room and with COVID patients, and I would wish them all well. Next. So these are unprecedented times. We do not know exactly what this means financially. We're going to have to really wait and see what happens. The COVID-19 has created a set of circumstances that struck us suddenly and harshly. We're going to have to wait to see how it will impact the city of Troy with the changes in our economy. Because of this, it was really difficult to present this budget that takes in full account of the financial impact in the future. If you think about it, our budget season starts in January, where our chief financial officer sends the forms and directions to our staff, and then they submit it in February with their projected expenditures and revenues. The city is financially sound right now. We have seen a decrease in some revenues, but we've also seen decreases in some costs. An interesting one that I am aware of is that that our health insurance, we're self-insured. I just assumed the costs would be going up, but no, because people can't go out, they're not using their health insurance. Case in point, I've delayed some dental work. The city of Troy is not relying on income taxes, sales taxes, or other forms of revenue. So therefore, we're not impacted immediately. Our budgets are always conservative, which helps offset future negative financial circumstances. The city has a solid fund balance, as well enough cash on hand to weather the crisis. So I've been in discussions with our chief financial officer, and he will be recently submitting some quarterly reports regarding this. Also, our chief financial officer has been in discussions with our financial consultants and our banks, and this will continue. This proposed budget is built upon normal circumstances and can always be amended in the future. Next. This budget calls for a decrease in the city's millage rate. It decreases 0.2446 mils to 9.9991 mils. The budget recommends to create 5 new positions. Currently, city management is not filling existing open positions, and any new positions that could be approved in the budget would not be filled until the overall impact of COVID-19 is understood. The proposed budget also recommends to increase the water and sewer rates by 2.8%. What that means is water would increase $1 per unit to $41.50. The sewer increase is 90 cents per unit, which would raise it to $29.10. The proposed budget also recommends $16.8 million in capital improvements. Next. I'm going to summarize the overall presentation. It will start with a all fund summary, and then it will follow up with a general fund summary. And our general fund is broken up into 5 different groups: public safety, general government, public works, community development, and recreation and culture. Then we'll dive into the special revenue fund summary, then the enterprise fund summary, the capital projects fund summary, internal service fund summary, and finally the debt service fund summary. And then the last slide will be a next steps, which will be presented to council, in which the mayor will facilitate after I present that slide. Next. Next, we're going to discuss the all fund summary. Next. This budget for 2020-2021 for all city funds totals $179.3 million. These revenues are spent between 28 different funds in 6 groups. These revenues include 37.4% in taxes, 2.3% in licenses and permits, 7% from grants, 5.8% from state revenue sharing. That obviously will be an interesting one because that could be reduced, and historically the state tends to raid that. Local contributions are at 0.5%. Charges for services are 35.9%, while fines and forfeitures are 0.8%, and interest and rents are 4.7%, while other is 5.2%. Next. So in regards to all funds and the expenditures, the general fund projected expenditures in this proposed budget is $67.8 million, while the special revenue funds are $23.4 million. The enterprise funds are $48 million, which is primarily made up of water and sewer, and a smaller amount for the golf courses and the aquatic center. The capital projects projected expenditures are $16.8 million. For major and local street projects, it's $9.7 million. Parks development, $2 million. Community center roof replacement and some other things, $1.1 million. The library collection replacement, $0.6 million. I would note that's been going down over time. Sidewalk projects is $0.5 million. And for historic village projects, $0.4 million, because we are still responsible to maintain the city-owned assets in the village. The total projected expenditures in the internal service funds are $16.5 million. Fleet maintenance makes up $7.4 million of that. Information technology, $2.4 million. And compensated absences at $4.7 million. The debt service funds projected expenditures are $6.7 million. Next. I'll turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer, Robert Malzek.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Council. Next slide, please. The first slide here is general fund revenue. As you can see, taxes make up over 55% of our revenue. And the good news about this, as it relates to COVID, is that this is going to take time for the economy to affect our property taxes. These property taxes at 55% of our budget are safe in the current 21 budget proposed. Our next biggest is state shared revenue at 12.9%. As Mark had mentioned, this is definitely something that we're going to have to talk about and keep our eye on. Later in the presentation, I'll get into a little bit more detail on that. Next slide, please. Tax revenues in the 21 budget, city property tax revenue is going to be $35.8 million, which represents, again, 55% of the total general fund revenue. This is an increase of $1.5 million. Speaking specifically about the city's tax rate, again, Mark had mentioned what it's going to be and in the decrease. Now, the decrease is because we're going to have a lower debt millage of 0.2. And we'll be talking about that later in the millage portion of this conversation. And the other reduction is due to our mandatory permanent reductions invoked by the Headley Amendment. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide here, it shows our total millage rate that a taxpayer would see, and it's representative of the Troy School District taxpayer. The highlighted yellow is our tax rate at the 9.999 rounded to 10. Basically, the city of Troy is 28% of the overall tax bill. As you can see, Troy School District, along with state education, et cetera, makes up the other component of that. So again, we're about 28% of the overall tax bill. Next slide. This is the city millage rates. There's 5 of them. General operating at 6.5 goes all to the general operating for the general fund. Capitals at 1.3486, reduced for Headley this past year. Refuse is going to be the same as it was last year at 1.09. The reason why that didn't get affected by Headley is because we're allowed to charge about 3 mils. 3 mils is the state max, then reduced for Headley, but we're nowhere near that. So our refuse, we have plenty of room there if we ever need it. Debt reduced, like I told you, from 0.58 to 0.38, and libraries reduced 0.6841 to 0.68045. And that's due to Headley. If you notice in the next column over for 2022 and 2023, debt and library are TBD. That's because the debt will be paid off this year in 2021, and the library millage expires as well in that year. We already have planned that we're going to be meeting with council in June to talk about the library millage, and I think the debt also needs a further conversation. Next slide. When we compare ourselves to some other communities, you can see from Southfield at 27.82 all the way down to us in Troy at 10, you can see there's a wide variety of different millage rates. What this shows is that we use our money wisely. We have a very, very low millage rate, and we should be very proud of that. One thing I do caution, though, is as you look at these numbers, that at some point it can't keep going down. The couple slides back, we were at 10.5 at one time, and it's gone down. The school districts have done a good job of keeping their millage a little more consistent. But again, we have the Headley issue that we have to be concerned about. Next slide. So state revenue sharing. I've done my darndest to try and get more information for you guys about this because I know that this is very contentious and a very big issue. State shared revenue in the first place is a return of the percentage of the 6% sales tax to local units of government. We're proposing $8.4 million. I can guarantee you we will not come anywhere near that $8.4 million. I spoke with the Department of Treasury. I've spoke with our auditors, Raymond Robson, and I've also spoke to former, when I used to work with Plant Moran as my auditor. I've spoke with all 3 of those groups, and no one has any information. The state treasury thinks that they're going to have some more information on this about mid-May. So this is something that we're definitely keeping our eyes on. And when we talk about Mark saying we're not filling positions and we're, checking every penny, that's because this is where we're most at risk. Next slide, please. Moving on to expenditures, general fund uses. Here's a great breakdown of where we spend our money. As you can see, public safety is over 50% of our spend. And that makes sense because we want to have a safe community, and it shows our commitment to the safety of the community. And under public safety, you have police and fire as the main components. Next slide. So in our general fund highlights, you can see for the 21 year, we're going to have $67.8 million, an increase of $1.8 million or 2.9%. Personnel services is the largest category of those expenditures. We're a service organization, so salary and wages make up the biggest component, and that's at $25.0 million, and it's increased this year by 4.4%. This is due to normal annual wage and union step increases, 2 settled contracts, which is the fire contract and the police command contract that you guys have ratified that we've ratified in the last 2 years with our unions. And then lastly, the city has also implemented merit pay for classified and exempt employees. Mark had mentioned that there's 5 new positions in this budget. 4.5 of them are within the general fund. One is for a police school resource officer, and we'll offset some of that expenditure with partial funding from the Troy School District. Also, there's one police lieutenant, one planner position, which we'll talk about later in the budget, and then the recreation department has 1.5 additional positions in their budget. We'll speak on that later as well. Next slide, please. Our benefits, which encompass FICA, healthcare, workers' comp, sick and vacation, costs are $11.3 million in this budget, and that's an increase of $0.9 million, or about 8.5%. And it's primarily due to increased healthcare at about 7% and workers' comp. We're self-insured in both of those. And like Mark had said, we're seeing actually the plan would be at least through June and July that our expenditures will actually be lower for healthcare due to COVID. And just another interesting point that I learned recently is that 60 to 70% of procedures that get delayed never actually occur, and that's from our consultant from previous other disasters such as hurricanes, tornadoes, etc. Supplies are budgeted at $3.1 million, just a $0.1 million increase, or 3.7%. Other services and charges are $20.9 million, and that's an increase of $8.1 million. And that's due primarily to we're spending more money on our fleet, and so those fleet charges are going to flow through to the general fund for that. Engineering services are increasing, and we'll be talking about those later. And also, you're aware that we spent more money in the voluntary fire incentive plan this year, and that's going to be increasing as well. Next slide. So back to public safety for a second. We have $36.9 million, which is an increase of $1.6 million, or 4.6%. The police department increased $0.8 million, or 3%. And that's because of personnel services, cost increases from our negotiated labor contracts, normal union contracts, and then the addition of the 2 FTEs from the prior budget. Fire increased $0.6 million, or 10.8%, and that was due to the personal service cost increases from our negotiated labor contracts, and also that increase for the voluntary fire incentive plan. Next slide. Next category is general government, and that's $9.5 million. It increased $0.3 million, or 2.7%. So this includes the city manager's department, which includes city council department, city attorney, human resources, all of financial services, and also the city clerk's office. And the primary increase this year in this category is from the clerk's office because of the additional election expenses for the presidential election coming up. Next slide. Public Works, $7.6 million, just a minor increase of 0.8% this year. So the slight increases in street maintenance, major roads, and total expenditures for drains. I just wanted to note here that the major and local street funds reimburse the general fund for all the street maintenance expenditures. Next slide. Breaking that down further, local road maintenance is $2.5 million. Major road maintenance, $2.6 million, county road maintenance, $540,000, and drains, $736,000. And it's to point that this is all just for maintenance. Capital is spent in the capital projects fund, and that we'll be talking about that later. Next slide. Community development, $4.4 million. It's an increase of 15.7%. The majority of that is the engineering expenses that I was talking about earlier. That's increasing $0.4 million for contracted services for engineering consultants. The increase is just due to continued increase in the demand for the engineering department. Spoke with Bill Hootery on this, and they've needed this for 2 years in a row. We'll be coming with a budget amendment to you before the end of this current fiscal year that we're in, because there's just been additional spend from the engineering department, which is good news for us because that means we're getting a lot of work done. Also included in this is one new FTE in planning to assist the planning director with the master plan review, day-to-day planning activities, and to manage the community engagement related to planning. Next slide, please. Recreation and culture. Now that's $8.4 million, and it's an increase of $0.3 million, or 4.5%. The increase is due primarily to the recreation department of $0.3 million. This budget center is adding 1.5 FTEs to improve the customer service to the community, improve communications and marketing, and stabilize the recreation and library departments with these additional full-time personnel. This budget area includes the recreation department, parks, the historic village, the nature center. It does not include the library, as the library has its own dedicated funding source and is a special revenue fund. Next slide. So the recreation department breakdown on the left-hand side is revenue, $3.8 million, versus expenses of $4.8. So basically, the recreation department continues to bring in nearly 80% of their expenditures through various charges for service, rent, and other sources. And this is definitely a concern of ours with COVID-19. You know, we're going to see like continued social distancing and stuff like that. So we're going to have to take a really hard look at a lot of these revenues are going to be reduced, very similar to the revenues that we saw in with the state shared revenue. Next slide. Parks has $3.2 million in expenditures, up 3.4% from the previous year. And you can see the items there that make this up. And it's primarily parks maintenance, local tree maintenance and planning, and athletic field maintenance. Next slide. Lastly, the operating transfers out. The general fund has always been able to transfer out money to the capital projects fund, and this year's no different. We're transferring out $1 million. That's less than last year when we transferred out $2 million. But we are going to support our major roads with this $1 million, and you'll see that later in the capital projects. Next slide. I'm going to pass it over to Bob Bruner to talk about special revenue.
Thanks, Rob. As we get started with special revenue funds, I want to take a minute to explain what makes these special. Basically, special revenue funds are used to account for revenue that comes with strings attached. These revenues are restricted for specific purposes. The city has 9 special revenue funds ranging in size from the $8.8 million Major Streets Fund down to the $1,200 Cemetery Fund. And tonight I'm going to talk about the city's 4 largest special revenue funds. Next slide, please. So first is the Library Fund. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Library Fund while you read the performance indicators on these slides. The library was a general fund department before the Great Recession. The Library Fund is a special revenue fund because voters approved a 5-year library millage on August 2nd, 2011, and then again on November 3rd in 2015. The current millage will fund the library through the coming fiscal year. The library millage revenue must then be renewed or replaced in order to keep the library open after June 30th, 2021. And as has been mentioned, a special council meeting is tentatively scheduled for Monday, June 8th to discuss the library in more detail. Next slide, please. Highlights for the coming year include modest increases in both revenue and expenditures. The proposed budget includes increasing the library's half-time marketing coordinator position to full-time. You remember Rob mentioned that there's 4.5 new positions in the general fund, and the other half of that position is here in the library fund. Now, the last point I want to make about the library fund is the use of fund balance. The proposed budget includes expenditures exceeding revenues by $392,000 and reducing the library fund balance to $27,000 by the end of the fiscal year. This type of deficit spending would normally be alarming, but the library fund is not normal. To make a long story short, the library fund started with nothing and will end with nothing unless the library millage is renewed or replaced in 2021. I think it's safe to say that's an important issue for the city, and again, we plan to discuss it in more detail at a future meeting. Next, please. Next are the city's road funds. These are special revenue funds because revenues are collected by the state and distributed to local governments according to Public Act 51 of 1951. This is what we mean when we talk about Act 51. Act 51 is the main road funding source for most cities in Michigan. Streets are defined as either major or local under Act 51, And each municipality identifies its major streets according to importance, and the rest are referred to as local streets. And of course, in Troy, we also have I-75, which is a state road, and some county roads and some other things too. Next slide. So the proposed Major Streets Fund budget includes revenue of $7 million. That's from Act 51. And the expenditures here are different from most other budgets. As Rob mentioned earlier, the money is transferred to the general fund for maintenance and capital projects fund for the capital expenditures that we make on roads. So here on slide 32, you see the $7 million in revenue and about $8.8 million in transfers out. Now 1.5 million of that 8.8 is going to local streets, 2.6 to the general fund for maintenance, 4.7 to the capital projects fund for capital projects. And at the end of the year, we're projecting a healthy fund balance for future needs. Next slide. So here, similarly, we have the local streets fund budget. It includes 2.8 million from Act 51. It includes that $1.5 million transfer from local streets fund that I just mentioned for the $4.3 million total you see here. And the expenditures total about $4.3 million. That includes $2.5 million to the general fund for maintenance and $1.8 million to the capital projects fund for capital improvements. And again, at the end of the fiscal year, we're looking for a healthy fund balance for future needs. Next slide, please. The refuse fund is a special fund because, like the library, it's funded through a dedicated millage. Although it's referred to as refuse fund or refuse and recycling, it includes refuse, recycling, and yard waste collection, which is a hot topic of conversation these days. The proposed budget includes no change to the 1.09 mils tax rate. It includes modest revenue and expenditure increases, and I think the main takeaway here is that no news is good news in the refuse fund. So with that, Mr. Mayor, we're at slide 35 next, which is about halfway through the presentation where I thought we had our break scheduled. But do you want us to keep going or you want to take the break now?
It's a good question. It seems like you've gotten further. It's going faster than maybe anticipated. It's only 6:30. And yeah, there is a break slide in the agenda packet. It's not showing on the screen, obviously. I'm not sure how everyone feels at this point. We could certainly take a quick break now if you'd like to stretch your eyes and get away. If you want to keep going through, I can scroll through and see if anyone's... what does everyone think? You can maybe thumbs up if you want to keep going, or say thumbs up for a break. Anybody? Looks like nobody's needing the break at this point. So if that's the case, then let's go ahead and continue. Maybe we'll check in again after the presentation, maybe before discussion if we do need a quick break at that time. I just want to make sure everybody's feeling comfortable and feeling as they should be, because this is a little different than normal, obviously. So with that, looks like City Manager Miller, we are declining to take a break at this point, so we'll pass it back over to Assistant City Manager Bob Bruner for a continuation.
Thank you. I will continue with the enterprise funds, and then it'll go back to Rob for capital projects and switch back and forth between Rob and Mark a couple of times, so we can check in with them as we go to see when we want to take that break. But continuing here with the enterprise funds, enterprise funds are used to account for business-like activities where the city charges fees for goods and services rather than levying and collecting taxes. Next, please. So the water and sewer fund are actually two different funds, the water fund and the sewer fund, but we're going to talk about them at the same time for the sake of simplicity and because you only pay one bill. The proposed budget includes increasing the combined water and sewer rate by 2.8%. Next slide. This slide shows how rates have changed in recent years. Next, please. This slide shows how Troy's rates compare to several other communities. And like the slide Rob showed about our tax rate, we're in a very enviable position compared to a lot of our neighbors. Next, please. Capital projects are important investments to help keep those costs low in the long term. The idea here is that we pay less now or more later. And in the coming fiscal year, we have $3.2 million proposed for the water fund and $7.5 million proposed for the sanitary sewer fund. Next, please. Now, the next several slides, slides 40 through 44, provide highlights of the proposed budget for the city's golf courses and aquatic center. As has been mentioned, the proposed budget was prepared before the stay-at-home orders were issued, so we know these budgets are going to change. We don't know when the golf courses will be able to open, and the aquatic center may not open at all in 2020. So in any event, we'll revise these budgets as more information becomes available. And rather than step through each one of them, I'm happy to turn it back over to Rob to talk about the Capital Projects Fund, which I believe will start on slide 44.
Thank you, Bob. Next slide. So the Capital Projects Fund, very similar to other years that I'm sure you've heard this before, the city has more needs than dollars to spend, and we must make difficult choices. Now, the current funding, though, is going to be at $16.8 million in the current year, and it's going to be an increase of 6.23% from the previous year. The capital millage rate will be 1.3486, so we're going to generate about $7.1 million from our millage. The majority of the other money is going to come from major and local street transfer-ins of $6.5 million and a general fund transfer-in of $1.0 million. Next slide, please. This shows you a pie chart of where these revenues are going to come from. Again, you can see that the majority comes in from our transfers in and taxes. Those are the two components that make up, 93% or so of our revenues. Next slide. So our capital projects fund expenditures are vast. We use 12 different categories there, and it's spread out over many different facets. But the two biggest happen to be this year major streets and local streets. 57% of our spend is going to be on our roads in our capital project funds. Next slide. This chart really shows a good showing that in 22 and 23, there's also a lot of expenditures still that need to be had. As you can see there, major streets are $6.1 million in 21 and growing to 6.4 and then to 6.9. So there's several projects in there that include Rochester Road in the 22 and 23 years as well. Next slide. Okay, so here we want to show you some of the breakdowns. Library is about $600,000, and Bob had said that, this has actually fallen through the years. I know Kathy wanted some more money, but as you saw in Bob's presentation, we're down to $20-some thousand in the fund balance. As it relates to equipment for police, the police asked for $604,000 this year, and we gave them all of it. And $260,000 is for a mobile digital computer replacement. As you're aware, the police cars are fitted the best we possibly can. Those are like mobile mini police stations out throughout the city. And so the police deserve and need the best equipment that we possibly can get them. Next slide. So this is the major and local streets that I was talking about. Again, major streets, $6.2 million of spend. We're going to spend $1.5 million on industrial road maintenance. In the past, it was always about $1 million. But in speaking with Bill and Kurt, we decided to try to increase our industrial road maintenance program, as we want to hold on to every possible business we can, as that sometimes, believe it or not, can be a determining factor. If their roads are that bad, they may move out. So this was important for us to increase that spend. Also, Square Lake from Adams to Coolidge and Coolidge to Crooks is going to be almost a $2 million project this year, and we look forward to getting that finished. And then local streets, we're going to spend 3.5, asphalt mill and overlay $2 million, and the concrete slab replacement 1.5, and for the total 3.5. Next slide, please. So for building and land improvements, you can see we have a varied items here. For parks, over $2 million, trails and pathways, $750, civic center parking lot demolition, $500,000, and tennis court resurfacing for $275. City buildings, we have $737,000, including the training center improvements for $192, district court repairs of $100,000, and access control and security cameras throughout the city for $300,000. Historic Village, over $404,000 this year, stamped concrete, exterior building repairs, and a roof replacement, totaling, again, the 404. In the fire department, $160,000, which includes a roof replacement for $95,000 at Station 2. I'm going to now turn it over to Mark for the internal service funds.
Thank you, Rob. I am going to summarize the internal service funds. These are a relatively unique type of funds in that they're when departments provide services for the cities, such as IT and fleet. Next, please. So the fleet revenues are expected to increase by 4% to $5 million, while the expenditures are expected to increase by 15% to $7.35 million. And that's primarily, this increase is primarily from updating the fleet. The 2021 fleet budget projects have a deficit of $2.33 million, which then reduces the year-end fund balance to $8.9 million. Next, please. Building operations. This is the departments pay building operations for maintenance and cleaning. The revenues are expected to increase by 11% to $1.4 million. And the revenues actually come from other departments paid to this fund, while the expenditures then are expected to increase by 4% to $1.38 million. In 2021, the building operations budget projects a surplus of $92,000, which would bring the fund balance to $1.12 million. Next, please. So the information technology internal service fund is computers, applications, programs, and maintenance. And their revenues are expected to increase by 3% by up to $2.26 million. But once again, though, that revenue comes from other departments to the Information Technology Internal Service Fund. The operating expenditures are expected to increase by 2% to $2.09 million. This budget also accounts for $150,000 in capital expenditures. In this upcoming budget year, the information technology budget projects a deficit of $21,000 with a year-end fund balance of $1.19 million. Next, please. I'd like to turn it back over to Rob. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Next slide, please. So our debt service fund, we have the voter-approved debt service funds proposal A, B, and C, and they generate their revenue by applying our millage rate, the 0.38 times the taxable value. This is, like I said, the last year for this one is we're going to pay this debt off this year. And that final debt payment is going to be the debt service requirement here. That's going to be budgeted for 21 fiscal year. It's $2.81 million. Now, we also have in the debt service fund the Series 2013 DDA debt, and that's financed by transfers from the DDA. The total debt outstanding will be, at the end of fiscal 20, is going to be $13.4 million, and is scheduled to be paid off by the year 2034. The debt service requirement budgeted for the 21 fiscal year is $1 million. Next slide, please. So these retirement liabilities that we have, I just wanted to give you an update. I worked with UBS and Morgan Stanley to get some updated numbers for you so you could understand, because these numbers are dated. They're from our CAFR. If you look at the bottom of the slide, you can see the percent funded. So we're going to start with the pension. And you can see that as of last fiscal year end, June 30th, 2019, we were over 124% funded. Because of that, we don't have to contribute anything in this current budget year. And our liability, because we're overfunded, is zero as well. Now, I did want to give you an update. I'm just looking here at my notes. We actually still are 114% funded if we use the two things here: the liability from the last actuary report and also the assets from the close of business on this past Friday. So that's about as current as I could get for you guys. And again, 114% funded makes me feel a little bit better than what it could be. Now, retiree healthcare, as you can see from the chart, we're about 75% funded from the CAFR from last year. And our liability is $30 million, and we have a contribution of $3.2 million. Wanted to note that contribution's actually $2 million lower, $2.2 million lower than the prior actuary report. So that's great news. And our funding level from close of business Friday was 71% versus the 75. So again, still in pretty darn good shape there. Volunteer firefighter, we are a little less than 50% funded, and I think you're aware of that because we went through that with you when we enhanced the plan this past fiscal year. And you see a liability there of $11.8 million. And at close of business from Friday, that would have grown an additional $1 million from our assets are down $1 million in that plan. So that's it for our legacy costs and our debt, and I'll pass it over to Mark.
Thank you, Rob. Well, these are different times. I usually count 2 to 3 minutes per slide, and we actually flew through this presentation a lot quicker in this format. But that's okay. Can we please go to the next slide? So what are our next steps? Now, traditionally, the city of Troy conducts two study meetings, special study meetings to receive, discuss, and provide direction regarding the city manager's proposed budget. The COVID-19 pandemic presents challenges to city administration and city council. We know that the governor's orders make in-person meetings impossible for some unknown time. We project we'll find more information out near the end of this month, but what that will say, we have no idea. We want to plan in-person meetings when we can. But the thing, at least that I am projecting in my discussions with senior.
Mark, your audio has disappeared for me. I don't know if it has for everybody else as well. Can you hear me?
I can't hear him.
I don't think he can hear us either. Mark. Can't hear you.
Mayor?
Yeah.
This is Rob. Until we get Mark back.
It will be coming will be the workplace in that social distancing actually have barriers through council to help decide what direction that city council wants to do. The city charter requires city council to adopt the budget on or before May 18th, and we have scheduled a public hearing for May 11th. At this time, we don't know if these will be remote meetings or in-person meetings. We just don't know. The other thing I would like to note, this format of having the public hearing on May 11th, you could adopt the budget at May 11th, or you could not, but you have a second meeting May 18th, so that if you direct the city administration to make any changes, we have a week to do that. you may have to adopt this budget without the benefit of in-person meetings, but we can amend the budget anytime in the future, and we being city administration are fully recognize that that's going to happen. And we recommend that city council discuss and potentially the budget in the future, because we know that the conditions will change, but at this time we don't know exactly what those changes are. The other thing I would like to note, it's difficult for our staff on this call to answer questions and facilitate discussion in a remote meeting, but we'll do our best. And if we can't answer any questions, we will always answer them in writing. In fact, for transparency purposes, it's my preference that we receive questions in writing, and then we, being city administration, answer those questions and we post them on the city's website. And finally, we encourage the public and the city council to review the budget and submit in writing questions to citymanager@troymi.gov. With that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to the mayor, and I believe we're going to go to the view of city council because the presentation is complete. Thank you very much, and we're here to help facilitate this budget approval process in this difficult time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. A couple things I just want to say again, thank you to you and your team for doing that. I mean, it's a year-long process anyway. It's not just something that comes to us right now. And we know that you were working on this long before COVID-19. It'll continue to be a work in progress because of the unknown circumstances right now. But thank you to you and to Rob and to Bob and to all the department heads for always putting together a very thorough presentation full of lots of good information and being prepared to answer questions, if it's not tonight, but in the future in writing as well. As it is important for us to be able to ask any questions that we see fit, and for the public to ask questions, and of course to have those answers publicly available for everybody. So thank you for all that you do in that. I also, just to kind of reiterate something you just said, to assure the residents of Troy and the businesses a little bit, we're required by our charter to pass a budget in May. That doesn't mean that it can't be and won't be amended throughout the year as new information comes to us and circumstances change. It's pretty regular business for us to make budget amendments throughout the year anyway. So there'll be no procedural differences for us to do that. But I just want you to know that although this budget may somewhat appear a little bit of a status quo budget in that it seems like nothing else is going on in the world when you look at the document itself, that's partly by design and partly because you can't budget for what ifs until you know what some of those things are, as I understand. So to the public, we absolutely understand that it may look like we're not acknowledging a big potential scary thing in our economy, but we are very acutely aware of it and will definitely be monitoring it as we go along and make the changes that we need to. Also, I was thinking a little bit about this, and this is mine and Councilmember Abraham's 5th year doing a budget. Councilman Hoderick, I think this is your 7th. Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton, it's your 3rd. But for 3 of you, this is your very first budget process. And so Councilmember Brooks, Ann Erickson Galt, and Chamberlain Krianga. So this is probably, it's very strange. Well, maybe it's actually kind of normal for you because you don't know any different. But this is definitely different times. And I just want to reiterate the importance of this budget process for our city. And this is probably, I mean, if you look at our charter and you look at the expectations of us, the most important thing we do on city council is approve the budget for the city. So this is definitely a different process. And we'll talk a little bit at the end about how we want to move forward, what next steps we want to take. But at this point, I did want to give an opportunity for council members to ask questions, recognizing that City Manager Miller just stated that, he is not without all, or he was without all of city staff here to provide those direct answers. But I think it's probably best, Mark, if we at least ask the questions while they're fresh on our mind now after the presentation. And I know that City Clerk Dixon's taking good minutes and notes, and they'll be written down there. If you don't have an immediate answer, we understand that. But I think it's good for us and for the public to have these questions asked now. So with that said, traditionally I would go around the table in the boardroom, but I'm going to go around my screen and just ask you if you have, my screen looks different than yours probably, so it'll be a surprise to you when I call on your name. But I'm going to start with Councilmember Chamberlain-Krienga and see if you have any questions that relate to tonight's presentation. I know you asked several already in writing, and they have been posted on our website for the public to see. So, but that said, I turn it over to you for any questions or comments you have as of right now.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. Just a couple of comments, because my questions are, they are online, if those can have a chance to see those. I again just want to thank you, Mark. Thank you, our city manager, to Rob, our CFO, all the department heads, everyone who worked on this budget. I think, as Mayor Baker had said, and my father, who was a longtime city councilman, used to always say, this is both the study and the adoption of the city budget is one of the most important things that we do as a council member. So I took this as with great honor and humility to have reviewed this over the weekend. So the only comment I want to share, which is also something that's online, is around the opportunity to think about our resident engagement on the budget this year, and the opportunity to be able to highlight some key elements of the budget, to create some infographics, to create some key highlights of things that are changing, even some things that are the same, to really help our residents be able to get that quick snapshot of how it affects them and their household. So I thank you for the chance to be able to raise that idea. And I think it'd be a great opportunity to use social media to be able to share out that information. I had the honor in my previous work when I was at the World Bank. My department did a lot of this open budgeting work to be able to condense very dense budgets, to be able to share them out with the public and to gather input. So I would really welcome the opportunity as possible for us to find ways to share that with the community. And the only other comment I would say is I agree that we don't know the unknowns, and it's hard to include those in the budget, but wonder if there's some way to have, maybe not a compendium, but maybe in our city manager, in your opening letter or somewhere, just even a paragraph that mentions that, we are aware of COVID and that these are things that we will be addressing. I know that I've had residents in my neighborhood reach out about that question. Exactly. When they looked at the budget, they were just surprised not to see it anywhere. And of course, we have the benefit of hearing from our city staff about why that is. But for someone who may just blindly come in and jump into the PDF and look at it, they may not understand that. And so for us to not appear tone deaf, but that we are aware of the environment, but that also there's a process by which we can amend the budget. But if there could be just a few lines that we could add to the opening statement to just let those who are reading it the first time, whether it's now or whether it's in 2 months' time, that we are aware of that. So that would just be the only comments I have at this time. And again, thank you to your staff for answering all the questions I had.
Thank you. All right, next up on my screen is Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton, who also submitted a lot of written questions already. So we'll see what he's come up with for this evening as well. But we will, Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. Like other council members said, thank you for all the hard work, for all the city staff for this. I know it is a really difficult time, and to do this now is even more difficult. And thank you. All the information was clear, and you answered it. I'm sorry I asked a lot of questions over the weekend, but I'm a numbers nerd, and I like to know everything in minute detail. A few questions I have is I really did like how on the one slide you broke down in the recreation how much revenue they bring in versus their expenses. It'd be nice to see that for public works. I know public safety has some of its own revenue sources too, and not like other communities that do a lot of fines and forfeitures. But I'd like to see that to kind of get a sense of what the COVID, how that could affect that, both the revenue and the expenditure side. One question I did have about capital projects is I saw mention that the community center roof needs to be done, but when it broke it down on the capital projects fund for fiscal year 2021, I didn't see the community center roof on there. So is that planned for 21 or is that planned for future years?
I see CFO Rob Malzek has raised his hand, so if that's all right with you, City Manager Miller, I'll send it over to Rob.
Yes, it's a $500,000 project, and it is within the $16.8 million in spend for the year.
Okay, for 2021. Okay,
Correct.
good to know. You answered so many of my questions before this meeting. I don't think I have too many others right now that are relevant. So thank you so much for this, and I think that's all I have.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton. Next up will be Councilmember Brooks. Surprise.
Sorry, yes, I had to unmute myself. Yes, first of all, I also want to thank Mark Miller, Bob Bruner, our CFO, and all of our city staff for doing such a wonderful job putting this presentation together, putting together our budget. It's laid out very, very nicely. I have one kind of comment and one question. One thing that really stuck out to me is just our millage rate. And I like how the graphs show when you compare Troy compared to other of our surrounding cities, how lean we really run. Our millage rate is really, really low. And just what we're able to do with our tax dollars is just amazing. All of the amenities we get, the wonderful schools that we have in our city, and just the resources that we have is just amazing, and what we're able to do with the amount of money that we have. The other thing that, the other question I had, I guess, I think Mark had answered this before, but I know that the federal government, because of COVID-19, is offering, some local municipalities some additional resources and funding, but I don't think Troy qualifies for that, correct?
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, that is correct. It really goes to much larger cities and entitlement community development block communities. We are an entitlement or a subrecipient of Oakland County, which is an entitlement. We may see some small dollars. Also, there's discussion in Washington about having a little more assistance to local communities, but we have to wait to see what happens.
Rob, do you want to add to that?
Yeah. There's 5 communities that are allowed to get money from the federal government. It's going to be about $800 million from the feds. It's Detroit and then 4 counties, and Oakland County is one of those counties. So the criteria was you had to be more than 500,000 people.
And we're not. So,
but we might get something through.
You said in Oakland County.
Right, we might get something through Oakland County.
But we are the largest city in Oakland County, so there's no other cities larger than our city, correct?
Right.
Correct. That is correct. Councilman Chamberlain Crandall.
May I ask that question? So I do hear that new legislation is imminent coming out of Washington, and just would wonder if any of that would have more of an impact on our communities of our size.
Go ahead, Mark.
So far from what I've heard is they're kind of ignoring municipalities at this point in time. But we'll pay attention and see what happens.
I do know that the U.S. Mayor's Organization is lobbying very hard to get direct funding to the municipalities and cities directly. But if there is resistance in Washington, and whether or not that would even apply directly to us, we don't know yet. So it will depend on what the final bill says, as I understand. And I think it also goes back to certainly something that all cities could use money, but we are not dependent on the income tax and the sales tax that other cities are. We have different financial needs. So I don't know if they do allot money for the specific municipalities, if that's there's going to be certain factors that need to be looked at, and whether or not we qualify even in that realm, I don't know, or if it'll just be based on population and stuff like that. But I think that's all speculative until there's a final bill out of Washington, assuming there will be one. But I have heard that there's something coming very soon, like Councilmember Chamberlain, like I said. It's a good question, Councilmember Brooks. Did you have any more questions or comments? No. Okay. Next up will be Councilmember Abraham.
Thank you, Mayor. as you noted, this is our 5th budget that we're going through. It's probably my 10th or 11th that I've followed very closely. And it reminds me very much of the 2009-2010 budget, where the recession had just happened or was beginning, and you didn't really see the impact in that first year of the 3-year rolling budget, but you can start to see the impacts in year 2 and 3. And so in terms of next steps and budget amendments going forward as being part of the regular process, I know we also do the quarterly updates on the budget where we are, I see that maybe being more of a presentation potentially than just being a report in Section P, because I think we kind of need to keep that visibility there, not only for ourselves but for our residents, so that they understand that, if our parks and recs aren't operating, by June 1st the way that we think that they are, or by the fall, what impact does it start to have on both our revenues and our expenditures? So my thought was that might be a good practice going forward, and I'm sure city staff will advise on the best way to proceed. But that's just one thought I had listening to the potential next steps. The other question I had, and perhaps it was asked, I wasn't able to read all the answers for the submitted questions, but we're starting to see, of course, Headley having an impact on the revenue that we can collect. And I think it's about 0.25 mils that we're not collecting because of Headley. What capital or what revenue are we missing out on because we are capped due to Headley? Is there an approximate answer, or you can get back to me later?
City Manager Miller?
I don't know the answer. I do know that we keep losing potential tax revenues of it, and over time it's just going to erode our revenues. I'm not sure if Rob, our CFO, if he has anything to add to that, but we certainly can answer that question. It is a long-term problem that will have to be dealt with.
Okay. Anything else, Councilmember Abraham?
No, not at this time. I'll submit any other questions later.
Okay, thank you. Next up will be Councilmember Erickson Galt.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have a lot of questions to ask. I do want to also, as mentioned earlier, thank all of our wonderful city staff for taking care of this and doing this budget. It's just absolutely amazing, especially this presentation, which really distilled down. As Councilmember Chamberlain-Kringa mentioned earlier, you get a 300-page budget with all of those charts, and it is really hard to digest. And I love this presentation. It's done a nice job of hitting the highlights, but I do agree with that infographics could make this even more digestible to our citizens, and I hope that can be in the works. As the question, I want to also highlight what Councilmember Abraham mentioned about it's great that we're running really lean, but there's going to be a point at which we're becoming too lean. And I kind of want to get a sense of where, in an ideal world, where would we be? What kind of are we hitting the point where we are running too lean now, where we are not going to be able to provide the quality of services and quality of life that our residents expect? And if we haven't hit that point yet, what is the bottom? And that's sort of, I don't know if there's a set answer to that, but it's something I want us to think about and maybe come up with a suggestion. And along those lines too, the other thing that I want to think about is we're going to be discussing in the future our library funding, and seeking a renewal of our millage. And I like to think about what millage would get us close to or even at where our library would be fully funded. I think a lot of residents aren't aware of the fact that the millage that they voted in several years ago doesn't fully fund our library. And I think that would be a wonderful situation for our library to have all the money that they need to do what they want. And so I just kind of throwing that out there as a policy statement and idea to think about over the next couple months as we consider our library funding later. As far as questions, the only thing that came to mind was we are foregoing some capital spending, probably capital spending on projects that are needed because our debt, at least in part because our debt service. So I'm thinking, I'm wondering if perhaps we might be at a point where we want to think about, as somebody mentioned earlier, that our school district has I know as someone who's been living here for a long time, our school districts is really good about using that debt service to fund capital projects. And I was wondering, first of all, what is the process? Is this a vote of the citizens? And what is the process if we decided that we wanted to ask our citizens to consider some debt service to fund the capital projects?
City Manager Miller.
Thank you, Mayor. I think there's 3 or 4 things I want to comment there. One, we previously had prepared some infographics. I'll connect Rob and Stephanie Flesher, our marketing coordinator, see what we can create. It will take some time to do that. Secondly, regarding the Headley effect, and in the real short term, it's causing slow growth. We can do some analysis about long term, how it would affect us. But I think more importantly, what we did for the Great Recession by cutting our staff by 1/3, we haven't done an analysis, but Bob Bruner and I have discussed this. We just can't cut staff anymore. I mean, we're so lean. So it is an issue. And if we go into a recession which really impacts property values, it will become an issue down the road. Also, we can answer the question related to debt service and the process to do that. We'll do that.
Very good.
Thank you.
Councilmember Erickson-Galt.
Yeah, I have one more specific question, and I was curious. We maintain a much lower water and sewer rate than other communities, and that's great. And I was wondering what it is that allows us to do that.
Go ahead, well, Mark, and then Rob.
Yeah, I'll start out. Well, you may think that because those rates are low that we don't have healthy balances. We do. I think it's just been a long-term, prudent management of the rates and saving money for future projects. And we just have a long history of doing that. Why is it so much less? I don't know exactly. I don't know if Rob can add to that, but we can look into it also.
That's a great question. And one of the big things is we don't have any debt. So I know very well the city that had the second closest rate to us was Warren, and I know their financials quite well. They have a lot of debt. So when you don't have debt, it's just so much cheaper. Secondly, I think our forefathers did a really good job of making sure when you tied into the system with, I call them impact fees, when you have impact fees to the system, Troy did a good job of collecting those fees from the builders, from the contractors. And so that help reduce the cost to the residents as time's gone by. And Mark's point is, I think it's just very well managed.
Mark?
I'm going to beat Lori to the punch. Technically, we do not have impact fees. They're not permitted in the state of Michigan.
Very good. Real quick, while we're on the water fees, I mean, every year it seems like there's an article that comes out in the paper that says, "Oh, they're raising your water rates." And I just wanted to clarify, and I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. It's my understanding that when we increase our water rates, it's because the Great Lakes Water Authority has increased their rates that they charge us. So we're really it's a pass-through onto our consumers or our residents. It's not that we're arbitrarily increasing them. Is that right, Mark?
Yeah, that is correct. It's a pass-through to Great Lakes Water Authority.
Right. So just to get that out there as always. Anything else, Councilmember Erickson-Galt? Okay, that leaves Councilmember Hoderick.
Thank you, Mayor. Boy, everybody else had great questions already. And I am thinking back, I am having some memories of, as Councilwoman Abraham mentioned, and it's when I first met her, was back through that last Great Recession. So it's been a long time of watching this and understanding the importance of looking forward, but it's hard to look forward when we can't quite tell what we're anticipating. You know, will we come out of this virus situation faster? Will they have a therapeutic that gets developed faster than we can imagine? You know, who knows what these impacts are going to be, but what I do know is we're well positioned to weather it. When I look at this budget, and it's a testament to the people that came ahead of us and to the staff's great continued stewardship of their work, their budgets, and whatnot. The quarterly meeting presentation idea is something that resonates well with me, and I just wanted to say that, and to also just offer, and I think this goes without saying, City Manager Miller, but say it out loud, and I'm speaking on behalf of my fellow council members, but I know they'll nod. You know, whatever you need from us as this unfolds and goes forward, we are well positioned to be agile and nimble, and you know, we're here for you guys. Hopefully things will iron out, but if they don't, and it requires budget amendments and special meetings, maybe special study sessions, please don't let us be the hang up and the hold up to the good work that I know you guys can do. And that leads to the question Assistant City Manager Bob Bruner mentioned, the June 8th, tentatively scheduled June 8th meeting about the library study session. And I'm hoping, you know, the question about our AAA bond rating and making sure we're protecting it, we know this budget does that, right? This proposed budget, you mentioned that in your opening letter. The go forward, making sure that we continue to do that is critical. And I'm looking at a lot of new faces here on the screen staring back at me as compadres in this, and a refresh on, you know, the bond rating and the challenges our millage cap brings to protecting that, I think would be in order at that study session. You're probably already planning to do that, but I want to say that out loud. It'd be a refresher for some of us, and maybe with COVID, maybe with the scenario we're in, there's an update to what that looks like and feels like, and the concerns that maybe our concerns need to be greater. Maybe they can be a little bit less than, who knows, but a fresh conversation about that, I think, would be in order for all of us. So I guess I'm asking if we could do that and make sure that's included. And also just in general on all the infrastructure work helps keep our costs low going forward, and we can see that in this budget. Am I correct? It's all that work that, whether it's roads or our sewers, what have you, as we look at capital maintenance going forward, that ongoing constant look that we do is just, it really pays off, and you can see it every year in the budget. And I'm seeing that here again, am I not? Yes. Okay. Thank you. So it's more comments than questions and confirmation of what we're learning. Again, thank you to everybody. I miss having the staff heads be part of the presentation. So please pass on that we miss them. And we know though that they're involved behind the scenes, and really appreciate the months and months of work that went into this. So thank you.
Thank you. If I could just piggyback on something Councilmember Hoderick just talked about a little bit about the library study session. I think I can do it by getting consensus here. If we could get that meeting scheduled, maybe have something on our next agenda to actually schedule that meeting officially, because I think it's important to have it on our calendars, even though we don't know exactly what it looks like in June at this point. But I think we should have it officially on our calendar. And June 8th was the date we had talked about. Would it drive consent, or can I get consensus to have them put something on the next agenda to approve it? I like thumbs up. That's kind of funny, but okay, very good. Looks like you have consensus. So if that's okay with you, City Manager Miller, to have that prepared for the next agenda, very good. All right. I had a couple questions also myself. A lot of them have been answered and asked already, but I'm wondering, and these are ones I'm just going to state them now, and obviously we can get a written answer in the future. But one of the questions I had with regard to state shared revenue, and Rob, you had spoken a little bit about it, and how the unknowns about it. But I'm wondering if we could have some kind of just an answer, a report, a look back to what happened with the Great Recession and what kind of funding, how the funding dipped then. Obviously, it's not expected that it would wipe it out to zero. I mean, if it did, that would be a huge, or it could, I guess it could. But I mean, I'm just kind of curious. I mean, right now we're scheduled at, I think, or $8.4 million. But if that doesn't, how much of that materializes is the question. But if we could have some kind of historical input as to what it's done in the past, and I think that's a pretty fair analysis to the past. But I think that would help give us some ideas. Another question I had is related to something you've talked a little bit about, City Manager Miller, and how our budget's so focused on property taxes, and so there's a lag in any kind of effect on our fiscal health in the city as property values potentially decline. Is there, and I know Nino Licari has done a lot of, if he was here, I'd probably ask him and he'd tell me and give a great soliloquy right there. But the question I have is, just a little bit of a reminder and a refresher for everybody on how that system works in Troy. And you and I have talked a little bit about it, but what happens, why it doesn't affect us this year, and when it would potentially affect us if there was a drop, and how that would relate to the taxable value and the property values and such. I think something like that might be helpful for us to see on council, and also for the public to see, recognizing that the property taxes make up the balance of our budget funds. So if that's a possibility. Yes. Okay. Good. The other question I had, we talked a little bit on slide 23 about the general fund and community development. You talked about a new position in the planning department that would help with the master plan review and the community engagement relating to planning. I know that we are not in a position to do any hiring right now, and we need to wait and see what happens with the financials and everything. But I do want to stress the importance of that. Obviously, prior to COVID-19, the thing everyone on this council and our city was talking about was development and the master plan and community engagement. So I do think that's actually all of the positions you've proposed to add, including the school resource officer. And I mean, those are all extremely important, but this one, I did want to make sure, I think that's super important as well. So I don't know if you want to speak. I can't remember. Have you talked a little bit? I mean, I don't think did you use the word hiring freeze tonight or not? But I mean, that's kind of where we are as it relates to this process, right? Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Well, we can't really meet, so practically there's a hiring freeze. But we know that our community wants to do a new master plan. We also know that we need to engage the community, especially around all of the nodes, because that's where a lot of the, I'll call it friction happens. And if we're going to move forward, we really do need to have someone. But what I don't want to do is hire someone and then have to lay them off. we want to be a little bit cautious in this process.
For sure. And I think that makes good sense. I just wanted to highlight the importance of that also. So thank you. Those are my only questions that I had based on tonight's presentation. As far as, before we move on to public, well, trying to think if we should talk about next steps now or if we should do public comment now. What makes more sense? Because maybe public comment will bring something that we need to discuss. So I think it probably makes more sense to do public comment right now, and then we can kind of do wrap up in the other business as to what we do next, if that makes sense. So I will turn it over to City Clerk Dixon, and I understand that you had one public comment come in at approximately 10 minutes after 4, which is outside the rules we've set. So I'd like to, I recognize that not everybody is perfect with those times, so I'd like to see consensus to see if it's okay if we include that 4th public comment as well. So can I get consensus from council to include those? Looks like I have consensus. All right, so City Clerk Dixon, I will turn it over to you for public comment.
Okay. This first comment is from Colette Morlock. She says, I am one of the many dedicated volunteers for the village. I also am on their marketing team and manage their social media. I'm sure you've heard how we provide educational and hands-on learning to cities and counties other than our own. And while this has been a time of economic hardship for all of us, I'm hoping that you will help us to keep the village open. We have put so much effort into continuing to educate the public given the current restrictions we have. We have been blessed to have had such wonderful support from the entire city in the past, which has enabled us to provide quality historical learning experiences for school children, as well as enrichment for seniors at our Thursday teas at 2. And with the wonderful partnership with the Oakland County Bar Foundation, we provide Constitution Cafes. I am grateful to be living in the city of Troy and the resources it affords us. Sincerely, it's Colette Fukuzawa. She's a member of the Troy Historical Society and a volunteer marketing team, Troy Historic Village. The next comment is from Alita Meskin. My husband and I are residents of Troy who live less than a mile from the Troy Historic Village. After becoming acquainted with the many worthwhile services the village provides to the community, from preschoolers to seniors, I not only became a member, but I'm also an active volunteer and financial supporter. In this most difficult time, I urge the city to continue and even increase their financial support to this very important pillar of our community. Next message is from Judy Eisman. I understand tonight is the budget meeting for the city of Troy. I just wanted to take a minute and thank you for your continued support of the Troy Historic Village. As a board member and past president, we have worked closely with the city to keep this important asset open and running for our community, and I hope this will continue for many years to come. Thanks again for your continued support. And the last message is from Susan and Kevin Lindsay. Hello. Knowing that the budget meeting is coming up, we just wanted to thank you for your continued support of the Troy Historic Village and encourage you to continue to support it. Recalling our history is so important to know where we come from and where we are going, and the village does a great job of doing that in formats that reach out to all citizens and all ages in ways that create great interest. We think it an invaluable resource. We have been involved with it for many years and are very impressed with all the diversity. And that's the final message.
Okay, thank you to the 4 different emails that we did receive. I think that certainly the historic villages, we've said it a million times, but it is a gem in our community, and not knowing exactly what the specific needs of the village will be in the future and when we get back to operational or more operational normalcy, I think that will certainly be likely something to be addressed at that point. And I imagine, knowing Lorraine Campbell as I do, that she will have no problem coming to us when she has any needs or concerns. So, but I appreciate the 4 of you that sent the emails and showed your support for the village. I think that it definitely is something that we will have to consider as we move forward. Just as a reminder to everybody that public comment for these virtual meetings can be submitted either via email to publiccomment@troymi.gov or by calling and leaving a voicemail. And I only remember part of that phone number. Maybe City Clerk can help me out. I know it's 248-524.
3302.
Oh, 3302. That was actually what I was going to guess. So public comment can also be done 248-524-3302 or via email for the next meeting we have. Would anyone else like to comment on any of those public comment emails? Councilmember Hoderick first.
I just appreciate those comments coming in from the Historic Village. I've also heard from Nature Center folks, and I think if members of the public even look at the questions, you'll see that several of us mention it. So that does remain important to me as well. And I'm definitely going to be watching and worrying through how we help continue to sustain those entities as we go forward. That kind of public-private partnership that we've had came out of the 2008 recession, and now here we are where it's going to be tested more. So we're very aware and we're very watchful, and I do appreciate the comments. Thank you.
Councilmember Brooks was next, and then we can go to Councilmember Tapling-Grango.
Yeah, I mean, I basically wanted to reiterate the sentiments of Councilmember Hoderick. That, yeah, I was, concerned about the Nature Center and the Historic Society as far as how we continue to provide them support. And if they had if they could outline or come to us also with some specific needs or requests, that would be helpful as well. So that we can try to address those specifically as far as our budget. So.
Councilmember Chamberlain-Grango.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank our residents for those comments around the Troy Historic Village, and also my thoughts are with the Stage Nature Center as well. So I come out of a sector, the philanthropic sector, where I know that nonprofits are struggling deeply, and the onus is on us to really do a lot to support. But what I do know is that the number one form of support that nonprofits need is general operating support. So as I study the budget, I know that we provide grounds and maintenance. There's, of course, the capital funds. We're devoting around $400,000 to some, or larger figure than that, to various capital elements to the Troy Historic Village. But something I do want to put out there, so I know we give about $100,000 basically in general operating support to both entities, is that I don't think that necessarily it's about waiting to when people need it, is that they need things to cover expenses usually sooner than later. And that I'm actually open to the idea that perhaps we think about giving more than that $100,000 if our budget would allow it around general operating support to be able to support those entities going forward into the next fiscal year. Because yes, programs might be decreased, but the needs of operating and the needs of taking care of animals or other elements to the work that these nonprofits do, it's essential. So I do want to just throw that out there.
I was muted. Does anybody else have any comments in relation to public comments that were given? I would ask maybe, City Manager Miller, a few years ago on council, I remember we had requested a graph showing how the amount of support the city had given the Nature Center and the village had grown, and how it actually had disappeared altogether and then slowly come back. It might be beneficial to see some kind of or have a refresher course of how that was. Same thing with youth assistance and the Troy Community Coalition, who once received large amounts of money from the city when times were different, and then got everything cut, and then it's slowly come back to smaller levels. I don't know if it'd be possible to put together a chart that's showing some of those things, and I think that might help in any future decision making as it relates to the Nature Center and the village as well. Would that be possible?
Yes. Okay.
Thank you. My questions take 100 words. Mark's answers are 1 word, so you can see how that works. But okay, so I guess that leaves us to next steps or where we go from here, as City Manager Miller, talked about early on his first slide actually was traditionally we have 2 budget study sessions. We had them scheduled. We had one for tonight and we were going to do one on Wednesday. This was prior to COVID-19 and going to the electronic meetings. And then we have the budget usually is also available for review in a hard copy at the library and the community center. Obviously, those are shut down, so everything is dependent on it being online. Then we have our public hearing scheduled for our May 11th meeting with the expectation that the budget gets adopted, but recognizing we have the meeting the following week if we need to push that back for whatever reason. But we are required to approve a budget in that second meeting in May. So at this point, the question becomes, where do we go? Previous budget study sessions that I've done, we've had this presentation, and then we've asked some questions, and then there's been follow-up information brought to us at another study session. I don't know if that's warranted here based on what the questions we've asked, or if there's any information that's come up that would necessitate something like that. So I guess my point is my question at this point is to all of you: what do you see as being a potential next step? Recognizing that we have our regular council meeting next Monday, and then we don't meet again until May 11th when we're scheduled to have the public hearing on the budget. Do you feel that we need to have another special meeting, study session type format to go over any other specific aspects of our budget? I guess I'll leave it at that. That's my open question for right now. So would anyone like to weigh in on anything like that? Or Mark, if you wanted to say anything in relation to that as well. Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton's raised his hand, so we'll start with him.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, my thoughts are, I think a lot of this process may be us asking, and normally we meet in person and ask a lot of questions, have a lot of back and forth. This makes it more difficult. To me, I kind of would just like the next week that council just has an open line of communication via email to various staff members, and then all the results of those questions should be posted online, and maybe the most important questions, the most important answers, we could talk about them at next week's council meeting, depending on how thick our agenda is on other items. To me personally, I would be fine if we just brought up the most important points there at that meeting, and then 2-3 weeks later at our next meeting we have the public hearing on it. That's where I'm at on this.
Okay. I also wanted to add, I forgot to say it a minute ago, we have our public hearing scheduled for May 11th. We don't know yet if we'll still be doing virtual meetings. The expectation of the governor's executive order that authorized these virtual meetings outside of the Open Meetings Act, I think extends past May 11th, maybe May 13th or May 18th even. I can't remember off the top of my head. But so the expectation is very likely that our public hearing for the budget could be on that May 11th meeting. And I know that could be very difficult to have a true public hearing when we're doing these virtual meetings. I don't know if City Manager Miller or City Attorney Bloom even wanted to just address that briefly. I know we've talked a little bit about it prior to this, but I just thought it would be good for all to hear. Mark, you unmuted, so maybe you wanted to go.
Yeah, I'll just start. I agree with you that it would seem awkward and tough, and it would not have the traditional in-person presentation. But I believe City Attorney Bloom has read the order and would be able to interpret us and tell us what we legally could or could not do.
Yes. So,
City Attorney Bloom?
Yes, Mayor, absolutely. There is the ability to approve the budget through a public hearing on May 11th if necessary. Certainly, we really want to make sure that we are providing the information to the public. I think that the city manager has done a good job about having the budget online. Also, these meetings are televised, also broadcast through different channels. So certainly it's our preference to have an in-person meeting. You do also have the opportunity to start the public hearing on May 11th. And then if there are some outstanding issues, you certainly could continue it to May 18th. The governor's order does go until the 13th, so hopefully we will be back to meeting in person by May 18th, and that is another option that you have.
Very good. Thank you. Councilmember Erickson Gall.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a question that I was thinking of earlier today, and if we do the May 11th meeting, which is supposed to be a public hearing in a virtual format, is there an ability to allow citizens to comment during the meeting as would normally happen during a public hearing? Is that from an IT perspective? I know we don't want to have a free-for-all. We don't want to go down the road that some other communities have where they get trolled at their virtual meetings. But I think that in the sense, if we're doing a public hearing, it really needs to somehow be a public hearing, and is that technologically possible?
City Manager Miller?
I cannot answer the question right now because we haven't been going down that route, but we'll look into it. But I'd like the city attorney to comment on what do we have to do.
Go ahead, City Attorney Bloom.
Yes, the order from the governor does allow for public hearings to be conducted virtually. And our meetings, we actually are trying to, we are compliant with at least the spirit of what the governor has ordered. Obviously, in person would be better, but we do allow for voicemails to be left. We do allow for emails to be provided. Obviously, all of the council members, any person can contact the city council members. Your information is accessible. You can send an email to all of the individual council members. So we are doing public hearings. It's very likely that we'll be doing a planning commission, and there will likely be a public hearing as well for that. So we can do that virtually and comply with the governor's order with what we're doing now with the opportunities to provide the public input.
Just a thought that I'm having that I may regret saying out loud now in a meeting. Don't worry, it's not too bad. But I think maybe there's something to consider, and I don't know if this is feasible, but if we were doing a public hearing on the budget, after the budget presentation, perhaps if there was and we're doing it virtually, and we didn't want to allow somebody to Skype in or to be part of our meeting, we have seen the horror stories in other communities where people are Zoom bombing or whatever you want to call it. But if it would be possible maybe to allow for emails and voicemails to be left up and through that meeting or even after that presentation, and take a 10 or 15-minute break to allow people who have been watching and perhaps want to comment at that time to be able to comment more in real time, leaving a voicemail or an email. I know that may create a weird break in our meeting, but to me that seems a little bit more in the spirit of a public hearing, allowing the opportunity for them to speak a little bit more in real time. Maybe there's reasons that doesn't work, but just to throw that out as a potential idea or something to look at, I think that might potentially be something we should consider if we can. So, all right. And other comments from council members on next steps or how we should proceed? Council member Chamberlain Kranga.
Thank you, Mayor. I just would mention that if we're able to do these infographics and able to get them out in the next week and a half or so, I think that will provide rich information, especially if we all promote it on social media, the city does. So being able, and maybe that would also inform whether or not we need some sort of further session together to be able to understand the input and address that. So I do want to throw that out there as well.
Very good. And Councilmember Hoderick, did you raise your hand?
I guess I wanted to circle back to the conversation we were having about Historic Village, Nature Center, Tri-Youth Assistance, and Tri-Community Coalition. We know from an operating standpoint, they've probably already taken quite a hit in terms of the income coming in, as have small businesses and each of us as residents as well. I I don't know if we need to be having a discussion that going maybe next Monday, or would there be a way to be looking at how we may add some more funds to help them get through the next month or two? If that's even a possibility, does that make sense at this time? I'm a little bit thinking out loud in terms of what should our timing be for that, because I'm certainly open to that. I know typically, we look at capital and we've had kind of our annual amounts of money that we've given, but that assumed them bringing in income. And we all know, practically speaking, they just can't at this point. So I don't know if we need to be looking at it to approve as, this was the proposed budget tonight with a study session. Could we maybe be looking at some options if we were going to meet Wednesday night, what that might look like, or bring it next Monday to the council meeting to give those folks some relief, because they do yeoman's work keeping those entities thriving. And I'm not sure how they can do it if we don't assist in some way. Or maybe if we reach out to them and we can say, let's, as this plays out, you can come back to us and, we would be willing to amend the budget. I don't know which is the best scenario to take, but I'm open to doing it up front. I don't know how other council members feel, but I am open to that.
City Manager Miller, and then Councilmember Brooks, I'll call on you after.
The problem is we don't know what they need. So I don't know what we would need to allocate to help them out. And I don't want to, right at this moment, commit that we would discuss it at the next meeting. I want to think about that a little bit. But what I really want to know and understand is what they really need moving forward. Maybe they don't know yet. And so we might be in one of those situations where we have to wait for things to play out before we can decide whether or not to send them whatever amount of money or budget.
Could you reach out to them, Mark? I mean, maybe that's too proactive to see. If they have an immediate need, I kind of feel like they probably would have already reached out to us. But maybe they're not for some reason, and maybe it's worth reaching out and finding out. Because technically, if they had an immediate need now, if there was, I don't know that the reserves are so low at this moment that they'd be desperately in need, but maybe I'm wrong about that. But we wouldn't be even talking about something for fiscal year 2021. It would be to amend something for our budget now, I think, if they had an immediate need. I don't know if that's something, and maybe that's not great, but if you could maybe consider doing that, that might help. Mark?
Yeah, we definitely can reach out, and we'll do that.
I think that would be, I think there's probably consensus on council for that to just kind of figure out where we are. All right, lots of heads and thumbs. So, Councilmember Brooks, you would raise your hand.
No, that's basically what I was going to say, is that if we could reach out to them so that we have a concrete number, or, so that's something that we can at least start with and discuss. So it's essentially what I was going to say as well.
Very good. Okay. And Councilmember Chamberlain-Caranga, you had also raised your hand in that.
I just meant to circle back that I do recall we did receive something from the Historic Village saying actually for this current fiscal year that they were due to run out of funds in a couple of months. So we actually have received that input, but it was more, I think there was not an exact dollar amount of what was needed, but the need was expressed to us. So I'm very delighted that we'll find a way, even in this fiscal year, we don't have to wait until July 1st.
Very good. Yeah, we did receive that letter. That's right. Thank you. It's a good reminder. Councilmember Abraham, did you have any thoughts about next steps or what we need to be doing at this point, or how should we do it?
I am supportive of utilizing next Monday's regular meeting to perhaps follow up on some of these budget study items, questions that have come up today. I don't think it would be the most prudent use of our time to hold that Wednesday session. So my thought is let's utilize next week's meeting since we already have it scheduled on the books. I would also support holding that May 11th public hearing, and depending on how real time we can get in terms of public feedback, I am open to holding that public hearing open until the 18th, where we might be in a position to actually have a meeting in person and be able to have residents come in and share their comments.
Very good. City Manager Miller, do you need something else from us on that, or do you have direction enough? I mean, it seems like we're not knowing what next Monday's agenda looks like. It sounds like maybe if there's some of these answers, we'll get answers written, of course, so the public can see them and all of us as well. But I don't know if there could be some time potentially in that and Monday night's regular meeting to discuss any of this, if necessary, if you think it's necessary. Do you need something more from us at this point other than what you've heard?
No, I don't. And just a quick comment. I think it would be good for transparency because we can post any new questions and answers on the website, and it would be immortalized on our website.
And as a reminder, the budgetary information is listed at troymi.gov/budget, I believe, is where it is. And I think when you click on that link, it brings up a nice picture of Rob Malzek's face. And then over to the left, it tells you where that budget is. And I see Mark Miller has his hand up. Mark?
Yes, I directed staff earlier today to put the link on the front website page for the budget.
Okay. So it'll be on the main webpage, troymi.gov, which will have the proposed budget as it is, as we've seen tonight. All of our questions and answers that we've done so far, and the ones that are forthcoming, that will be the area where you can look and see them. And anything else? Is there anything else you need from us tonight, Mark? Or are we okay? Okay. I wanted to thank, I said some thank yous earlier. I did also want to comment, our CFO is a relatively new CFO to the city of Troy, and he's doing his first budget in a very strange way as well. So I think, Rob, you did a great job under these circumstances, and it's nice to have you on board and be officially part of this first fiscal year that you're planning for with us. So thank you for being here, and thank you for figuring all this out as well. So look at the silent claps from Rebecca over there. But Rob, go ahead.
So Ethan, I just wanted to say thank you for those kind words. For myself, it wasn't easy, but Mark mentioned a great team that we do have. It's a great to work for Mark and the team that we have. But three people I do want to mention: Lisa Burnham's my accounting manager, and she helped me with this tremendously. And then Gert Periscoven from IT and Fernando Pereira from IT. What we did this year is we took a lot of the previous files and converted them into our New World system. And the idea was to be more efficient going forward. And that was a lot of IT work. And so we got here today because of that. A lot of cities are not producing their budget by charter deadline. So again, it was through Mark's leadership that we were able to get this done.
Well, thank you. And thank you for calling out the additional staff members. It is a testament to all of your hard work to make sure we stay on charter deadline and do everything like we're supposed to do, even in these unprecedented times. So thank you for all of that. And just a reminder to everybody before we adjourn that out there, stay home, save lives, stay safe. It's working, it looks like. It's still a lot. It's still very serious out there, but we are hopefully seeing some of the curve flatten, and we're seeing the effects of all of our hard work and our sacrifice that we're doing now. So please continue to keep up the proper social distancing, the staying at home except for essential needs. And with that, I will go ahead and adjourn tonight's meeting and see you all very soon. So we're adjourned.